Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to show how to merge your sprites in from y'all's other assets for the purpose of fitting into the one school day structure. As you may recall, with all of our old sprites, they simply had one direction. For instance, the player idle would only look and idle for facing to the right. Walk back, walk front, only did the walk movements for those respective directions. What we need to do for the new program is to merge them all into a format that has it all directions in the same sprite. And so we see here the player has all four directions. The attack has all four directions. My run has all four directions in here. In order to implement this for the purposes of our activity, let's go ahead and focus on, I'm going to just give an example of how to do the run carry. First, you're going to want to import your sprites from the game currently. And so in this case, I've imported my player run sprite, and then walk back and walk front. These would be the three equivalent sprites that you would have had. With this, you then will have to open up the edit image for each of these three sprites that we have for the three directions that we created. You then know you want to modify the run carry sprite, but the size is already off. Whenever we did the sizing for our sprites, we did 64 by 64. Now, some of y'all did use the entire 64 by 64 space, some of y'all did not. For the purposes of my take on the game, my sprites, I drew them in 64 by 64 and then shrunk them down because I thought they were a little too large. You don't have to do that. That's up to you, your choice. I shrunk mine down because whenever you see the game, the Mr. Durant sprite is much larger, and then the player sprite, which is meant to be a student, is much smaller. That's my artistic take. You can keep it 64 by 64, or you can shrink it to 48, 48, doesn't matter. Because what you need to do is with the player run carry or whatever sprite you are working on, you need to expand it so that way the larger value matches up with the scale you're going for. So if you're going for 64 by 64, you make the smaller number 64. In my case, because this is for my player, I want him to stay small, I make the bottom number 48. Now that we have that, we can see everything is scaled up. It's perfectly fine, no issues there. I will then go into editing my image. Now that I'm in here, I can get to work. If your sprite is a little bit larger, you can go into the resize and resize the top to also match 48 if you actually use the full space, or if you're using the 64 by 64. Once you make the larger number 64 with the scaling, you then switch over to resize and make them both 64. That will simply add extra space to it, but does not change the size of your sprite. That way, once we add in the stuff, it'll work out fine. Now, in here for the run active action, it has 8 sprites for each of the 4 directions, so a total of 32 frames. I do not have 8 sprites in any of my activities. I have 5 sprites for walking to the right. I modified this and reduced it to 5 for walking backwards and forwards. So rather than having 32, I will only have 25 for each direction. You must place them in the correct sequence as shown here. So we have first our right direction. Let me find my right facing run sprite. I'm going to select this, grab the selection box, highlight my sprite, or alternatively, you can do Control A, that'll select the entire thing. Control C will copy it. This will now copy this to your paintbrush as an option. Your brush will save the last 5 things you've copied. That is how you can grab the individual sprite to start doing modifications to it. This is one method if you want to get it in perfectly fine and mess around with it. If you are already happy with the default state of your sprite, rather than having to copy these in, and delete them, place it in here and try to get it to work out just fine. I would assume that you have already done a lot of the placement already here. So you can alternatively simply select your sprite, all of the frames, Control C to copy, move over to our running one, and do Control V to paste all of these frames. And let me delete the frame that I modified. So I now have my 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, yeah, it's 6, not 5. I counted wrong. My 6 frames for running to the right. I then can delete these 6 frames for carrying something to the right. There it was 8 from the given ones. I then have to do a little modification, add in little hands in here. I think, let's see, the hands are at 3524. So I'll place this at 3524 just to get a rough scale. But that's for my sprites. To show that they're holding stuff. Again, you can modify these as you see fit. I'm going to put these off to the side just because I know I'm probably going to mess them up and fix that detail later. Then I have the running backwards or running up. I will then go over to my walk back, grab these 6 frames, Control C, go over here, delete these frames for the walking up and throw in my 6 frames for walking that direction. Then we have the walk back frames. Grab these 6 frames, throw them into the walk back. Delete these here. Paste this in. And now I have these 6 frames going in the forward direction. The challenge, of course, is we never created frames moving towards the left. We're going to use code to address that. With this new structure, we actually do need to create something moving to the left. The easiest thing we can do, we can copy our frames that move towards the right. Control C and grab these. And then move back over to here. Paste them in for the moving to the right section. Or sorry, moving to the left section. Delete these sprites. We no longer need these. And so here we need to figure out how can we get them to face to the left. The easiest thing is if we switch over to selection, select everything, Control C, that copies everything. You can then press the mirror tool or X to rotate. And I need to figure out roughly where it would be in the same spot. In my case, I can see in the bottom left corner here, the pixel address. So to be in roughly the same spot, at least if my shirt lines up with the stripes, I'm at 2924 as the pixel location. I use that as a reference, delete the old stuff and go back to 2924. It's looking now to the left. I do the exact same thing here. Select, Control C. This is now on my brush. Delete this. Actually, I messed up. Now go over to our previous frame holding our little person and figure out what spot am I supposed to be in. It will not always be the same. Sometimes your sprite is shaped slightly differently. In this case, it happens to also be 2928. It's not always the case. Just be aware of that. So I go to 2924. Okay, looks good so far. Do the same process here. Select this, delete this, go back over here, flip it. Okay, where do I need to be? 2924 also. Okay, looking good so far. 2924. Select all, Control C, delete this. Go to the previous frame, flip this. 2924 also. Select all, delete, flip. 2924. And finally, delete, flip. 2924. And so now I have the sprite ready to go for all 4 directions, and they're all properly merged. The last thing, just because this is the carrying sprites, I drew little hands. I need to figure out where my hands would fit to make this work. I'm going to leave them off to the side just for now while I do testing, because I don't want to have to delete a sprite. So let me just put them off to the side so I can see what level this is at. Actually, I'll raise this one up a bit so I can see if this one is any better. And so with that, I can then run. And so we see here, we imported our sprites into our sprites folder, and then we modified the existing sprite. We didn't create a new one. We modified an existing one to fit and update accepting our new content. So let's see, let me pick up something. Okay, we see as I move, I'm floating slightly off the ground. So there's some issues we need to fix on the origin. The hands actually look at about the right level. I think that's actually pretty good. So now that I see a test of where the hands are, I can try to modify that to fit where I want them to be. Now that we've done that, we see we have something off on the origin. Let's go back to our carrying sprite. Where's our origin? It's over here. That's why our shadow is off. Based off of how I did my origin for my other sprites, the origin needs to be down next to the foot. That is how I had mine set up. You'll figure out where your origin needs to be, but it does need to match up across my run carrying, my normal run facing to the right, my, where's my standing carry, and then just standing and attacking. You see, in my case, the origin is shared across all of the different player sprites. The only exception is whenever I get hit, the origin is down below, but it's actually in the same spot. It's just that my feet are up, and so that's why they're not down at the ground. But the origin is in the same location, so that way it stays consistent whenever I have to move between the different sprites to do the operation. The last part here is just figuring out where the hands go whenever I was walking this direction at this level. So an x-axis or y-axis of 30 looks to be good in terms of where the object was being held at. So I'm going to move this in. Or let me Control C to copy that, delete that. And so at 30, where were they? That while holding them is 32. Grab that, and so at 32, that's roughly where the objects were. And I just throw this in for all of my respective frames for this direction and just play around with it in all of the other ones. There will be a lot of, I guess, repetitive work that you'll end up having to do in certain parts of it to make it consistent. But once you get it down the first time, the rest of the sprites become very much easier to walk through. Since you've already done it once, you just modify your existing format. In this case, since I was modeling, taking in your original sprites and importing them, there's a little bit of work, but I would recommend starting with the player, player carry, then player run, because the run carry I could have just copied my player run and it would have worked out just fine. And then all I needed to do was add hands. In this case, since I was demonstrating for y'all to understand, I did not include, or I did not just copy it over. For my other work, if I did, I would have been able to just add the hands and I would have been done immediately. It's not perfect. Again, this is my artistic depiction of it. And so that's why the hands just magically appear whenever I need them. They normally don't exist. And in this case, I actually need to delete that hand, select this hand, rotate it this other direction. This part doesn't necessarily look that great. Actually, this is a little too close. Move it over a little bit. And if you select it across the board, you'll be able to grab them, copy and paste, throw this into here. This will serve as, it's not centered, so it'll bother me later on, but that'll serve as the outline. Once you get both in, you'll have, let's see, how many frames? That's the last frame. That's slightly off. Okay, with that, if we run this now, the sprite should be in roughly the right spot. The only downside is just because of my depiction of it, the sprite, whenever the player is walking up, looks like they're carrying the item behind them. That's okay. We can just imagine that the person does that for whatever reason. So once we jump in, you see Mr. Duran is there watching, and I can pick up this rock, and you see my little hands carrying the item. I need to fix one of the sprites. It has the off by a pixel, which is why he's carrying like that, but it could look like he's wobbling it. To the left, it's consistent. To the right, same thing. One of the pixels is off, and going up is consistent. So I just need to fix a couple of pixels on the movement to the right and movement down, or you can keep that. It's your game, your design, however you want it to look like. But otherwise, that wraps up this video on how to bring in your sprites from your current design to be supported in the game that I've provided. And so if you have any questions or need anything, just let me know. Otherwise, that's all I've got. Everyone have a good one, and I'll see y'all next time.